Great to see such a great turnout today, and it's great to see that so many people are interested in learning more about how we can work together to make workforce engagement more part of the way that we do business. What Ian and I hope to do this morning is to give you an overview of the journey we've been on. It's been a 3.5-year journey so far, and give you a sense of why workforce engagement is so important from our perspective. Illustrate how you can establish the level of engagement at your work sites and your strengths and weaknesses. Highlight some steps that you can take to improve the level of engagement, and also provide you with an overview of the tools that are now available to help you in this journey. I think it's fair to say that, here's the mouse, that as an industry, it's always good to have a Dilbert cartoon in there somehow, we now get it. There's been extremely strong support for this initiative from the SCLT, Step Change Leadership Team. And I think that reflects very much the fact that although most leaders truly believe that workforce engagement is the way forward, there is no manual just now for how to do this. Step Change has done some tremendous work over the years. And I think many of you will recognise some of the names of projects and initiatives on this list. Much of the work that's been done so far you can categorise as work in relation to guidance on plant and equipment, on processes and on individual behaviours. And all of that is great. I mean, there's been some fantastic stuff done. There's also been some world-class initiatives over the past few years. Boots on for Safety is one that comes to mind. Which I think industry-wide we recognised as excellent practice. But the challenge with any initiative and any process is how do you sustain momentum over the longer term? This slide brings into pretty sharp focus, I think, the challenge we have as an industry. If you look back in the early days of Step Change, Les mentioned it's 15 years now. Since Step Change came into being, and over the first 5 years of Step Change, essentially there was a tremendous amount of progress made. But if you look at more recent times and over the past 10 years or so, there's a sense that we plateaued, and if you look at over 3-day injury rates, there hasn't been the improvement we would all like to see. There is certainly global industry data as well, which we look at, and that tells us that, again, we're a long way from being, the safest place to work in the global oil and gas industry. We believe that at least part of the answer to this challenge is to achieve a greater level of workforce engagement in our work sites. And through workforce engagement, we'll actually achieve the safety performance we're desperate to find. And I think you've heard from Jake and Steve. Jake and Steve, incidentally, have been stalwarts of the steering group over the past 3.5 years. So I've been pretty heavily involved in this process, but you've heard their views about why this is important. There is strong supporting evidence to show that moving from a personal to collective involvement in improving safety will make a significant difference. And our priority then has got to be to set the right tone and create the right environment to allow collective involvement to develop and to grow. Yes, I remember quite clearly the start of this journey, and I'm sure Ian does too. It was at a Step Change Planning Day in November of 2008. And there was significant frustration amongst the Step Change leadership team at that meeting that despite all the energy, all the effort that had been put into improving safety, we just weren't making the improvements that we really wanted to see. So the team outlined some of the challenges they felt that needed to be addressed. And it was issues like, how do we follow up on Boots On for Safety but do it differently? How do we create a knowledgeable, safety-motivated workforce? How can we create a transferable model that will deliver best in class for any company that takes this on? How do we get more active employee involvement with employees feeling that they can actually make a difference? How do we identify and share good and poor practice, both within and external to our industry? And how do we know how we're actually performing as individual companies? So the solution, a work group was formed. It didn't have a name when it started out, but it became to be the Workforce Engagement Work Group. So from the step change planning day, terms of reference were set out, which the work group started to pursue. The initial stage of the journey was to try and identify good practice and identify what was actually getting in the way of improving site safety. We used the step change networks. Some of you here will have been at some of those meetings, hopefully, and they helped us to identify obstacles to workforce engagement. And in parallel, we invited management, union representatives, elected safety reps, to provide input to the work group. They actually came to our meetings and they gave us their open views about what was good and what wasn't good. Raymond Holroyd, some of you may know, he was amongst this group. However, we're grateful to everyone who provided input at this early stage and helped to shape our thinking. I want to also mention Ken Gillen. Ken joined the group as an OIM. Ken was very active in pulling together a group of OIMs who helped us to explore and capture information on good practice amongst OIMs in terms of engagement. Dave Nichols, who was Les's predecessor as Step Change Support Team lead, he was also a committed member of the steering group, and he actually pointed us towards, he found the Railway Standards and Safety Board information which helped to lead us towards a survey tool as being a key component of the toolkit. We also had some strong people like Martin Ellens and Rod Buchan on the team. Martin, as you probably know, is now one of the co-chairs of Step Change. They contributed a lot over the 3.5 years, but in particular, I want to mention the fact they put their boots on. They got out to a number of onshore, offshore installations, did a kind of mini survey and captured some amazingly good information about good practice that was already in place in our industry. From an early stage, however, we identified sustainability as one of the critical factors for us. We realised there's no point in having short-term focus on workforce engagement and then allowing this to lapse. And I think, you know, as I mentioned earlier, the challenge is how you keep this going. Continuous improvement workforce engagement, we believe, can be stimulated by creating a feeling of what we call chronic unease, where companies are able to benchmark their performance against their peers, identify their relative strengths and weaknesses, and then share this information internally. I think this can further fuel the desire to improve performance, and by providing tools to support the improvement effort that follows, a continuous improvement process can be initiated. During the concept exploration and testing phase, the group developed the survey tool. We took that from the initial work that Martin and co had done, developed also the reporting methodology, came up with the outline toolkit components and the structure of the practical guide. The next phase involved piloting the final survey tool, and we conducted a pilot across some 10 installations and a subsequent 5-vessel subsea pilot. And we're very grateful to all of the OIMs, boat captains and safety professionals who actually supported this and participated actively in the pilots, surveys, and in the follow-up workshops, which explored learning from the survey process, as well as what actions had been taken to build on the learning. And you're going to hear this morning from several of those companies who participated in the pilot surveys. They'll talk about their own individual journeys. We're now at the implement plan phase of the project. Today's launch sees the toolkit being rolled out industry-wide. Ian's going to talk in due course about the engagement model, about some of the toolkit components and about sustainability. So I'll leave further elaboration of this to him. This next slide illustrates the extent to which the work group has engaged and consulted in the course of developing the toolkit. As I mentioned, the journey started with the SCLT. We've regularly consulted and updated them as the project has progressed. Ian's a member of the Step Change leadership team, so is there to remind them every meeting how we're doing. We've also benefited from direct input from individual OIMs, from ESRs, trade union reps and company MDs. And we've been fortunate enough, as I mentioned earlier, to have Jake and Steve with us throughout the project. I mentioned the network meetings. They were extremely helpful in building a sense of the obstacles to network, to workforce engagement, but also in helping to point us to where there was some good practice in industry. We've also shared information and progress with Fraser Easton, with the WIG, OIAC's Workforce Involvement Group through Fraser, and vice versa. We've also had the involvement of experts in their field, such as Rob Broughton, who's here today, of Blue Provident. Rob helped us with the model to make sure it was credible. And Harry van der Vossen, who helped us to make this all real in terms of the IT side of the process. And we've also had excellent support from Les and from Gillian, who you'll see here today, and other members of the Step Change support team, and from some committed professionals such as Scott Mitchell of Halliburton, who's helped us to get the project over the line. Over the past 6 months, I have to say we've been completely overwhelmed by the level of support for the project from within the industry at all levels, including a few people who started out as skeptics, and it's always good to have a few of those around, and have become staunch supporters over time. What we finally focused on as a work group and steering group was on understanding how we can create effective workforce engagement to allow us to deliver a transferable working model. We also focused on understanding the impact of people's behaviours at all levels, as I'm sure you can guess, is key to developing the right culture and the right type of relationships. And this in turn led us to identify enabling behaviours for all levels of the workforce. And some of this is on the material you have in front of you today. However, as I mentioned earlier, the key focus was on sustainability, and this led us to the maturity model, which you'll hear a bit more about, benchmarking, and the concept of workforce engagement becoming a fourth leading indicator of industry safety performance. So I'm going to hand over to Ian now. Ian will do the smart bit of this and take you through in a bit more detail what we have achieved. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everybody. Mike has used the word journey a few times this morning already, and I'm here to help you on the start of the next phase of that journey, because this is the launch, and what we're looking to do now is to actually ask you to participate in the continuing journey with regards to workforce engagement. But before I do that, what I would like to simply do is to add my thanks to everybody that Mike's already referenced. It would not be possible for me to stand here if it wasn't for their individual engagement. And I would like to personally thank them and acknowledge them, because they really have been a tremendous support, which has allowed me to stand here with Mike and give you now a sense of what we believe you can achieve with the application of the Workforce Engagement Toolkit. If I put up this slide, it's going to give you a sense of what we believe the working model that's built into the guide is all about. On the left-hand side of the slide, you can see that we start with positive engagement behaviours. And you'll see the names we've given those groups of engagement behaviours. And many of them will be familiar to you from previous initiatives. But the guide actually helps you identify at different levels throughout the workforce what we expect to see demonstrated by way of positive engagement behaviours. So that's the plus, then we have recognized that in order to foster that culture of engagement, we must address obstacles. We must remove those obstacles. And we can all think what those obstacles are. Some of them are negative engagement behaviors, and Jake's alluded to some of those in the past. Something to do with plant and equipment, something to do with adequacy of processes. We believe that if these two inputs to the model are being actively worked, so positive engagement behaviors take away obstacles, that will foster a culture of engagement. But you notice there are two balloons, two bubbles on the right-hand side of the slide, and they're really output expectations, or output behaviors. If we input positive behaviors, take away obstacles, then we anticipate that that culture of engagement will encourage output behaviors, participation, and Steve referenced participation as being absolutely critical in his introduction, whether it be in toolbox talks, risk assessments, etc. But most importantly for us, it's challenge. It's a culture which encourages and where we all have a role to play in terms of participating, but also challenging. And I think it's those two aspects, participation and challenge, that really does give us an indication of how robust the workforce engagement culture is at any work site, whether it be DSV, platform, or indeed onshore. Made reference to these behaviors, these engagement behavioral dimensions. I'm sure you've flicked through the practical guide which is on your desk, and you'll have seen how these behaviors weave their way through the entire guide. Whether you are a managing director, whether you're a safety rep, whether you are a charge hand, the guide describes the sort of behaviors that we anticipate should be demonstrated at the different levels against these, the visibility, communication, involvement, and support. So those are the inputs, but equally, we're looking for output type behavior. In other words, we ourselves and how we participate and how we challenge. One thing that might strike you is that we don't use the word leadership on this slide. Leadership is absolutely critical, but the reality is that what we anticipate that at every level in our workforce, leadership must be demonstrated. And leadership is about demonstrating these engagement behaviors. We really are expecting everybody to play their part in this regard. It is a genuine relationship between the employer and the workforce. Which allows me to move on to this slide. As Mike referenced in his piece, we have long recognized the importance of individual contribution, individual behaviors, personal responsibility for safety, for example. And I think you've heard reference a number of times now to the survey. And I suspect that in this day and age, every one of us in this room has participated in some sort of survey. And it's typically an attitude survey, an attitude towards safety, an attitude towards your employer, an attitude towards a brand. But this toolkit offers us something different. And there may be some in the room say, yeah, I've heard that before. The reality is that this has been tested and proven to us through our pilots. Everybody that's participated, and I can say this with my hand on my heart, everybody that's participated in the pilots, be it the offshore installations, we had an onshore work site involved, we've had DSVs, we've had semi-submersible drilling rigs, FPSOs, they all said we got something different out of this. And I think it's because we focus on relationships. It's not just the individual, it's the quality, it's the type, it's the strength of the relationship between everybody in the industry, whether it is the managing director and a charge hand, whether it's the OIM and a supervisor. It's the quality of the relationship. And the toolkit, and the survey in particular, allows you to test the quality of those relationships at any work site. And that is irrespective of who the employer is. This is aimed at the work site and everybody who participates at that work site, irrespective of the employer. Obstacles. We use the word obstacles. So we're looking for positive engagement behaviors, but we also need to remove obstacles. Now I have to double take when I look at this slide because I think we're very familiar with a slide that looks something like this. It's something about the major accident hazard model, the bow tie, and barriers. But actually, Conversely, what we're talking about here is taking that wall down, removing obstacles. So you have to get your mind around that a little bit, but it is about removing those obstacles. First of all, you have to understand what the obstacles are. Meetings with elected safety reps, the network meetings gave us a very good sense for what those obstacles may be, those traditional obstacles. You know, a negative behaviour might be no open door policy, not being approachable as an OIM. But equally, just as important, negative behaviours might be not engaging fully with safety representatives or undermining change processes. You know, if we're static as an industry, if we're not changing, we're going to stagnate, we're going to die. But we all know that at times, irrespective of where we are in the organization, we can, as individuals, undermine change process. Inadequate processes. So there's negative behaviors, inadequate processes. Straight away, our mind goes to, you know, processes are out of date. We've all got our little black books, and that's where the shortcuts are, and so on and so forth. But inadequate processes may actually include, for example, not constructively not involving the safety representatives in reviewing processes and changing processes. And of course, there is the issue of plant and equipment, and that leads us into KP3 and KP4 and aging infrastructure and so on and so forth. But removing those obstacles and being seen to address and remove those obstacles, first of all understanding them, then addressing them and removing them, is a key component of the model. And that needs to be done hand in hand with understanding the positive engagement behaviours, as well as looking for those participation and challenge dimensions. So what are we trying to achieve with this? We've all got these snippets in our minds about positive engagement behaviours, removing obstacles, but then maybe this new dimension of the quality of relationships and encouraging participation and challenge. What are we trying to achieve with this? There has been reference already from Mike and others about sustainability and a journey. And this slide attempts to depict the journey that I think it's already been alluded. We are on a journey. Whether it was back in the 1980s, whether it's Houston, doesn't matter. There is a journey starting at one point and progressing towards another point. And so we've tried to create this maturity model, which allows you to sort of plot yourself in terms of a journey from the left of the slide to the right of the slide. It's 5 levels of development, and the survey tool will help you place yourself somewhere on this journey. It's not a point that you just simply want to be at. It is a journey. It is where am I today? Where do I aspire to be? And how do I get there? How do I get to that place? Now, you know, Mike, in his slide with the hexagons, we had over 1,000 people have contributed to this work, insofar as over 1,000, in fact, I think it's near 1,500 or something like that, have contributed by participating in the survey. We've had 9 offshore installations, we've had an onshore work site, we've had 5 DSVs, we had a number of installations we visited that as part of the trial. So you might be interested to know roughly, where do we think we are? What is the data that we've got? If we benchmark ourselves as an industry, what is the data telling us? You might be interested to know that on balance, when I take all of the data together from everybody, we're sitting somewhere in the middle. We're sitting somewhere around levels 3, level 4. Workforce routinely engaged with a safety effort. Workforce and management working partnerships, certainly examples of that. There are examples of workforce leading the safety improvement effort. And Steve's slide, I think it was Steve's slide, had acknowledged the things like workforce-led behavioral safety programs. That to me is a great example of what level 5 is all about. But when you go into the breakout sessions, you're going to get examples of what we think really are at the right-hand side of this progression. Because every one of the work sites that participated in the trial came back with something we thought, that is worth sharing. That is something that everybody else can learn from. And that's what we hope that you get out of the sessions after this, or after we go through the actual survey tool itself. So it's a journey. And you can probably anticipate where you think you might be, but the importance is, how do I move myself across this maturity model? So there we have it. That, in essence, is what we're trying to do. It's a simple model. It's about behaviours on the one side. It's about removing obstacles. It's encouraging output behaviours, participation and challenge. How do we set about doing that? And we come to the practical guide, which is on your desk, and the toolkit itself, which Les has already made reference to. It will be available to you at the click of a button later on this morning, or as Les said, he'll be up all night. What is it? The practical guide opens the door to a toolkit which is industry specific. It's been built not by gurus, not by experts, but by genuine, committed professionals in our industry, OIMs, elected safety reps, step change leadership, etc., etc. It gives you practical guidance to improving workforce engagement and posters, checklists, guidance, genuine help to encourage you to participate in this challenge. I've described the engagement formula, gives you more examples, and for every level of the workforce, there are behaviours listed to stimulate the thinking around what is it that I have to do as a managing director, or what is it that I have to do as an elected safety rep? How do I demonstrate positive engagement behaviours? Very, very importantly, and we're going to major on this a little bit, there is the continuous improvement cycle. And that continuous improvement cycle starts with a desire for change. Something has to stimulate a desire for change. Whether it's the chronic unease that Mike referenced, whether it's perhaps a little bit of prompting from a session such as this, it has to start with a desire for change. The survey tool can then help you understand the areas of strength, where you're good, but equally where it may be that there's opportunities for improvement. And then you get into the important part, and I'm going to come back to that, selecting the issues to be addressed and the development plan. But it's a circle, and we've all seen it before. We all know the plan, the do, the check, the improve loop. Nothing new about that. But it is important that we have some stimulus. This, we hope, is stimulus. And we'll come back to how we might have stimulus going forward. But the right-hand side, in terms of the industry, but the right-hand side perhaps will foster that desire for change, given that you will be able to benchmark the data from the tool, from the survey, excuse me, will be presented back to you in benchmark format. You will be able to compare your own work site with all of the data in the database, in other words, work site industry. So you will be able to compare the sort of responses you get from the survey against the rest of industry. Equally, on the bottom right-hand side, there's a performance trending. This is the maturity model. So for every one of the dimensions, we can describe what we think the different dimensions look and feel like, depending on where you are on that maturity model, whether it be in the hardly engaged to the fully engaged. Now, we think that data, if shared internally, in other words, if fed back to the work site, will create that sense of chronic unease. Because typically, if you know you can do better, that is going to encourage you to address the issues and carry on that journey of continuous improvement. So benchmarking, performance trending, plotting on the overall maturity is the pit that we think that's very, very important in terms of sustainability. In a little bit more detail, the practical guide, as you've already explored, I'm sure on your desk, talks you through the why, the formula, behaviours, obstacles. I particularly want to take you to the supporting toolkit, because the OIMs that engaged with the survey, and some of them are in the room this morning, they all came back and said, we need a little bit more help. Give me a poster. Give me some PowerPoint data, that, PowerPoint format that I can use to help engage with people. The practical guide really sets out expectations. Expectations that we have as an industry in terms of how to encourage workforce engagement, but it also sets out expectations in terms of how to conduct a survey, how to then address the data that you get back from that survey. Of course, to move forward, you have to understand engagement, and that's where the online survey is going to come into its own. This session is not about the survey. The survey is only a support to the practical guide, the totality of what is contained in the practical guide. But nevertheless, the survey is incredibly important. And the mechanics of this survey, Harry van der Bossen, who I'm pleased to see is in the room now, is going to walk us through the mechanics of this survey and just how simple the survey is. We believe it's simple. We have been told it is simple. And Harry's going to talk you through that. But I want to make 3 key points about the survey. First point, it's absolutely confidential. It is data fed into the survey, goes to step change. Step change then, independently of the worksite, the employer, or whatever, turns the data into a report, an output that goes straight back to the worksite. All personnel, regardless of their employer, at a worksite is expected to participate in the survey. So again, that's unique. We've all participated in attitude surveys, but typically if I'm a Fairfield employee or a Senergy employee, or it doesn't matter, you know, it is back to my employer. But this is restricted or focused on the work site. Yes, we can slice and dice the data to look at operators or employers, but the reality is this is about the work site. And finally, our experience has taught us that it has to be flexible. There are people in the room maybe working on DSVs where access to broadband or the web isn't that easy. So we've designed it to be flexible. The survey can be done via the web, or it can be done via paper. We've tried to make, whilst the questions are always the same, we've tried to be smart about how the questions are phrased. In other words, if you happen to be on a boat, it's a captain and crew. On an installation, it's an OIM and crew. So we've tried to make it reflective of the actual work site. Our strong preference is for people to use the web. If we got one piece of information throughout this, it's make it safe in terms of confidentiality. And we believe the web-based approach is the way of providing assurance to the people that are contributing to the survey, to give them that reassurance that it is confidential. I said before that this isn't about a survey. If we think that this whole initiative is just about running a survey, we've absolutely missed the point. The survey is the beginning. And you see here it's on the left-hand side of the slide. What is absolutely important, the transformation that may be achieved, will only come around as a result of focusing on the right-hand side of this slide. And that's about understanding the results. Step change can help there in the way that the data is fed back to the worksite. But results feedback and developing an action plan and then following that action plan is worksite specific. Nobody else can do it, but that is where we can make a difference. The whole guide, the whole toolkit is designed to encourage that local worksite response. And I think it will be supported by this benchmarking concept. You will have data for your worksite as to how it compares not just to another installation in the operator's portfolio, but against industry. You will have information about where you plot on those 5 levels of maturity. That, I think, will stimulate local chronic unease, as Mike referenced earlier. It's going to stimulate people to say, I don't like that, I don't accept that, I can do better, we can do better. And I think that, you know, every time the survey is done, and of course it's not just a one-off, the expectation is that it would be done, you would go through feedback, you'd go through the plan, you'd go through the development, you would probably want to revisit again, perhaps in a couple of years, repeat the survey to see, well, first of all, how has the rest of industry matured? Because the industry should be arranging its bench, its position overall, and how have you at a worksite improved? And so that's really the continuous improvement cycle. Survey starts, desire for change, start with the survey, identify the areas of improvement, Recognize and celebrate the areas of strength. That's what the case studies are about. But recognize those. Don't forget what's really good. But think about areas where we can improve the development plan, prepare the action plan, implement a plan, and review the progress. So I think this is pretty much self-explanatory. This cycle is very self-explanatory. Don't think there's any in the room that isn't familiar with it. But sustainability has been absolutely core to what we've been thinking about during this 3.5-year journey. And how do we create that sustainability? Well, first of all, there's a local chronic unease. But I also think that it's important that we have that odd prod, that jab, that external encouragement, if you will. And so I'd like to just move to the last slide, which is around sustainability. And it's great insofar as you're now going to see the pieces join up, because Jake, in his piece, made reference to the current industry key performance indicators, KPI. These are not KPs, as in Steve's territory, but the KPIs that we use as an industry to measure ourselves in terms of performance. Hydrocarbon releases, verification, safety control, maintenance, backlog. Now, I think you could all look at them. People in the room are probably looking at these and saying, yeah, I've seen these, I know those, and you know what? They're pretty much lagging. If you've had the release, it's too late. If you've got thousands of hours of backlog, it's too late. So we believe that with this new fourth leading indicator, we've now got a suite of indicators which genuinely covers lagging and leading. Because if you have got good or improving and good workforce engagement, that is a leading indicator which ought to make sure that the chances of the hydrocarbon release or backlog or whatever are reduced. Chances of having those are reduced. Again, I think this will create at an industry level a sense at times of chronic unease, because with the data we have, we'll be able to drill in, and actually from a step change perspective, I think this is going to throw up areas which will be clearly identified as things that we know we need to address and can do better with. You know, for example, not require back guidelines, a couple of years old now or whatever. You know, we knew for a while that they needed to be addressed. They have been addressed. I think this sort of information coming out of the data will throw up other similar areas which, as an industry, we'll recognize we need to tackle. So both at the industry level, we'll be creating unease. At the worksite level, we'll be creating unease quite intentionally. And I think that chronic unease is going to encourage us on that journey. So, in conclusion, hopefully by now you've got a sense of the different components of the toolkit, what it's all about, the formula, the benchmarking, the journey that I think this is actually part of. It's not just a beginning and an end, it's a continuous journey. And you're going to be able to see just in a few seconds just how easy the toolkit is, the survey tool, excuse me, is to use, and you're going to get a chance to actually use it yourselves. But this is the launch event. This is a point in a journey, but it's only a point in a journey, and from now on in, it's really down to industry. It's down to everybody in the room. I don't need to repeat what Jake said. He said it for me. This is our opportunity to do something, to take hold of something, and to do something, and actually moves on to the next step change in safety. If I remind you of what the vision of step change is, making the UK the safest place to work in the worldwide oil and gas industry, I think we in this room, we're here because we know that workforce engagement is something that we need to address, tackle, and get on with. I hope that you find that the practical guide, the toolkit, and the survey is of real practical use, and that we will be looking back in a couple of years and celebrating the uptake of this particular program. Thank you very much.